Okay, thank you everyone for joining me on Sitting Down with Scholars. I'm joined by Julia. And Julia, can you start by just telling me a bit about your career in academia or in research so far?
Yeah, so right now I'm about to graduate with my master's degree. It's in clinical and translational sciences with a focus in pathogenesis of human disease. So it's about a 2 to 3 year program. I stayed for 3 years. And so my research project looked at both bladder cancer and acute kidney injury. And I was specifically studying this gene called metallothionein 3 to see, because the role of it is really unknown. So we wanted to use multiple different models to kind of see if we could find a common ground function for this gene. And so that's what I spent the last few years doing. And I got my bachelor's degree in forensic science and in biology. So I also work on the forensic side of thing as well. And I kind of do a lot and I really enjoy it.
Okay, and just to break down some of those key terms that you used, in terms of pathology and that type of element, for those who aren't as aware of it, what does that look like? What is the general field of study?
Yes. So pathology can ultimately be tied back to the study of different tissues and organ systems within the body. And you can kind of branch out and go into a lot of different directions. My ultimate goal is to go through medical school and I want to be a forensic pathologist. So, in that circumstance, what we would do is we're the ones who are performing autopsies and looking to diagnose cause of death, manner of death, and mechanism of death. Um, I worked as an autopsy technician for 5 years, so I got a lot of experience in that field that way. And, they often are the people who are kind of behind the scenes in medicine, and they lead a lot of research, especially with cancer. A lot of pathologists ends up working with different types of cancer and looking at its mechanisms, how it develops, hopefully, to find better treatments and maybe one day some kind of a cure or something.
Okay, and with those points around the causes and mechanisms of death, what do they actually look like? Because I know most people who might not be aware may have only seen death certificates, unfortunately, when they've seen the very simplistic view that they get when a relative has unfortunately passed away. But what does that look like from a forensic pathology point of view, or someone who works in a mortician's point of view?
Yeah. So basically, what we're doing, the setup of it, for cause of death, we want to find the most like specific thing that happened. We're looking for a pathology, basically. So something that we can really see either by our bare eye or under a microscope that can contribute to why they have passed away. And so, one of the things that I focus a lot on my page too is mentioning that cardiac arrest isn't a cause of death, because a lot of times physicians who may be newer will try to put it on death certificates, or other people who may be filling it out may put it there because they don't really know very well. But why we can't use it is because it's not specific. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it really just means that the heart has stopped. And if the person is deceased, we kind of know that, right? And so that is ultimately a mechanism of death itself. So we're looking for something more specific. And a good example of that would be an MI, or a myocardial infarction. So, like a heart attack. And so you would put that as the immediate cause of death. So that's usually going to be the first line right there that they give you on a death certificate. And then under that, you're usually given like 3 or 4 other lines. And this is where you can tell, it's kind of like telling a story. So it's the progression of events that ultimately led to that. And so, in our example of a heart attack, we could say, okay, maybe this person was diagnosed with atherosclerosis. I can barely pronounce that word, but you get the gist. So maybe they were diagnosed with that 6 months prior. So then you'd put that on the following line, and then so on, like anything that directly contributed to that final event. So it's a lot that goes into it, and there's different ways to look at it depending on where you're kind of at. And so, if we're looking at it from a forensic pathology perspective, we actually get to do a lot more because we are the only ones who get to use all of the manners of death. So, at least here in the United States, it might be different in different countries. We have 5 of them. So, we have natural, accidental, homicide, suicide, and then there's unknown. And so we get to use all of them. If they're a physician in any other type of field, they can only use the natural cause of death because the other ones need to be investigated, right? And so that's what we end up doing. And when we can bring them in and when we're filling it out, the way we approach death certificates is slightly different because we get to do an autopsy, right? So we get to see a lot more. So this is where we need to have evidence to back up our claims. And so you can't just write something down. Like most death certificates are usually due to medical probability. So what's the probability that someone did have a heart attack in the hospital, something like that. But for us, we need to be able to show that. And so, for example, with the heart attack, we would be able to see that as soon as we cut into the heart. You can actually see the scarring from where that happened. And so they can take out that section and they can look at it under a microscope. And now we have the evidence to prove that that's what happened. Different things like that. So when we make each of these claims, it's kind of like a step process as we go through. When we get a case in, we would also get all of like the medical history that for that person as well, so we can read through it to see if there's anything else, because you never know, like some person maybe 20 years ago was shot and they couldn't remove the bullet, and in 20 years maybe it was moved and it hit the heart and now they are deceased because of it. So now that would technically be still a homicide, and so it would be investigated differently. And so there are a lot of different avenues that go into these things and like how it works. And I always tell people, I'm like, to me it seems very simple because I did it for so long, but it's also like, that's why forensic pathologists need a medical degree. They do so much training to be able to do this because they're hard, to be able to go back and look at all those things. But it's definitely just a very lengthy process of processing the evidence that you see from medical history, looking at what we see from the body, and ultimately being able to decide the timeline of events.
So I suppose there's two questions that I've got for that, which I'm quite interested in finding out a bit more about. One is, first of all, when you've got that, does it change based on how the individual has been brought to you? Because I would presume that if the person has largely died of natural causes in a hospital, what most people view is possibly more the traditional way that most people meet their end, I would presume that your investigative process would be different based on, they've come in, the various, in theory, more that has gone into their end of life care, and as a result, there will be less points of that timeline that you have to fill in the blanks for.
That's a good point to bring up because right now, I'm just going to put my little disclaimer here. I'm speaking about the United States because that's all I know. But here we are actually really like underfunded and we don't have a lot of forensic pathologists. So there's a massive lack of resources. And the way that we accommodate for that is that we don't take a lot of cases unless we have to. And so each state has a different list of like cases that need to be autopsied. And then otherwise it kind of goes by discretion of the medical examiner or the coroner, whichever state you're in, whoever's looking over the case. And so most of the time, offices won't do cases for natural causes of death. So let's say, Grandpa Joe, whoever, is 90 years old. He has a history of diabetes, alcoholism. He's has struggled with liver failure and cirrhosis and stuff like that. If someone goes to the hospital that way, you kind of have this amount of evidence that when they pass away, the physician who is then taking care of them, whether they're in the emergency room or their primary care physician, they can then sign out the death certificate because we know essentially what's going on, right? It's going to be one of those things. Unless there's anything obvious like at the scene, or, when they come in the hospital and you see a huge wound, something like that, it's going to be written down that way. But like, let's say, 40-year-old Aunt Sue or something is found at home, but she doesn't have a medical history. So then we don't know what happened. And maybe they'll check around the scene and there's nothing suspicious, but we still don't know what happened. So we can't write a death certificate. And so then we would bring her in for an autopsy and go through, and then we can look and be like, okay, this is what happened and this is what happened. And it's kind of a different process too, just depending on the manner of death and what we're expecting to go on. Like sometimes if it's a homicide, we have to collect physical evidence. So like clothing is a big one. If there's like an overdose, we need to make sure we're getting extra stuff for toxicology. So blood samples, urine. We also collect vitreous from the eyes, different stuff like that. If we find drugs, like we have to package that as evidence, different things like that. So everything is very much so a case by case basis, just depending on what's going on. So we tend to not do a lot of natural deaths because most people tend to have some kind of medical history where their physician can sign off on it. But then, it's common in the US, I don't know about anywhere else, where men here tend to like to not go to see a doctor. They so then they don't have any history, but maybe they have like some underlying disease that they just don't know. And so then when they die, we would be able to figure that out. And then two, what's really nice is we can also test for genetics. So let's say someone has cancer, we can also send off samples for genetic testing. And if it comes back that their cancer was genetic, we can then alert the family and be like, hey, this is something to keep in mind because it was genetic. So you may have susceptibility for that. If you want to get tested, make sure you're getting like all of your screenings and checkups as much as you can. And that way they're more on top of it. And there have been a lot of cases that I know based on like forensic pathologists that I've worked with or know and I'm friends with where they've actually helped family members that way. Like there was a daughter who found out that their father had it. And so they went and got checked early and they found very, very early stage 1 cancer somewhere and they had it removed and now they're okay. So that's one of the really nice things that we get to do to also help living people, I guess.
It's interesting. And to bring back to the other question, this is more, I will stress this is a hypothetical. And for anyone who's listening, it's a hypothetical scenario. I'm not expecting a clear answer. What your point was with that, the migration of a bullet. If the bullet migrated in that case and it's been left in that person's body for, as you said, 20 years, would it be if there was a person who caused, let's say they got into some form of fight or scuffle, and as a result that caused the bullet to migrate? Would the cause from your profession's point of view be from the person who's caused the fight or the person who's shot the bullet?
That's a really good question. Oh, sorry. All right, if you're done. Yeah, no. So basically, a lot of what we're doing in these kind of scenarios also falls to opinion. But I feel like in that scenario, the homicide would then be so homicide is a medical term. I will say that, at least for the United States. So if someone were to be charged for causing that homicide, it would be the person who then shot them. Because at the end of the day, it was still the bullet that had moved. But then if they were fighting, it would be charged to a different degree. So they would also probably still get charged with something. Maybe it would just be aggravated assault or just assault, whatever it may be. But they wouldn't necessarily, in my opinion, get that homicide charge, the same one as the other person, because their intention probably wasn't to kill them, right? Like they were probably angry, depending on the scenario of whatever's going on. Maybe they're upset about something, they just punch them, whatever. So the big thing behind that would be intent. Like if they were beating them up because they were planning to hurt them and kill them, then they probably would get charged with it as well. But yeah, it's just situational. But that's a really good question because there are a lot of cases we get that are like that. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and it's our job to kind of differentiate what's going on, where we're at, and then work with the prosecution or the defense, depending on whoever reaches out to us and whatever side, what information we have to give, to then help guide them in their direction.
That's really interesting. Like you say, I do accept it is highly scenario focused, and you might get the same or similar case, and you might get a completely different outcome based on the circumstances that are in that, and that's something that people should read into more. But going on to more of your passion for your field, what really drove you down this particular path? What pushed you to pursue this?
So, when I first started college, I actually wanted to go into forensic anthropology, so working with bones and stuff like that. Um, but at the same time, when I started college, I actually found out that my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And at the time, I had you've heard about it from TV kind of a thing, it's a memory thing, but I didn't know the full extent of it. And that was something that really scared me. And honestly, what that first semester when I found out, I wanted to drop out. Like I wanted to leave and go back to be with my dad because I had just moved from where I'm from in Michigan all the way to a completely different state halfway across the country. And I felt like a horrible person for leaving him behind because he didn't really have anyone else there that could really take care of him. And so he ultimately had to be put in a nursing home. And at the end of the day, I just wanted to know more about like how this works and the condition. And so I kind of didn't realize that at the time, but that's what started pushing me towards pathology in general and understanding how that worked. And my curiosity for that actually led me to meet different forensic pathologists that worked at the med school. And so, talking with them, they kind of helped explain things to me. And the way they explained it was just like, it made sense. Like they knew the level that I was coming from. They were able to interpret that and see, and also see how scared I was at the same time, and handle that kind of conversation with such like grace and care that I still understood what was going on and I wasn't confused. Like it wasn't an ego boost for them or anything. They weren't trying to sound super smart. Like they really walked me through it. And that made such an impact on me to be able to know. Because one of the things that I had learned too is that neurodegenerative diseases like that can't be firmly diagnosed until an autopsy is done. So they have to do a brain dissection and stuff like that, and then it can be analyzed with histology, so looking under the microscope. So when people are diagnosed when they're still alive, it's usually like a really, really educated guess. But a lot of the times, some of them have very similar symptoms and features that go into it. So then misdiagnosis can be higher. And that was something that really like piqued my curiosity, was learning more about the pathology side to eventually come to different treatment methods. And so again, one of my end goals, as well as being a forensic pathologist, is to also be a neuropathologist. And I just wanted to be more involved with pathology at that point because I was like, that's like number one, the human body is just so amazing and all the different things that it does and how resilient yet how fragile we can all be. And then also like we've learned so much in such a short amount of time with the development of science, but at the same time, there's still so much more to learn. And pathology can really be a good foundational aspect of all of that. And so once I learned that, I was like, maybe one day I'm not going to, I can't cure my father. I can't make him better. I can't take back all the years of suffering that he's had to go through. But maybe my contributions to the field of science and pathology and forensic medicine, whatever it is, can make that difference for someone else. And that's what I wanted. And that moment was really like this is what I want to do and this is where I want to be.
That's really, yeah, I can completely understand that. And that personal connection will have a resounding impact on you, and it clearly comes through in what you're saying. I will say it's interesting speaking to yourself, and when I had Toby join me, who was looking at Alzheimer's and dementia as well, particularly how you learn from the cadaver, the brain, that how it affects different parts of the body. It's deeply fascinating in terms of what you're gaining from that, and equally what if even if you're not necessarily the one doing the direct research, what your information and your samples that you collect can be used to inform other research that's going on. I think the wider connection of the data that is ultimately collected from that is really fascinating in terms of how the field interconnects together.
Right. Yeah. No, it's very interesting to see because I think one day, I'm hoping to get into med school. Right now, I'm on a wait list, so I gotta just wait and see if I'll be able to start in the fall. But I would like to also do a PhD. Honestly, I just love learning, and so I would like to do something more in neuropathology as well to kind of build on that relationship with everything and understand that better. Because one of the things, it's one of my main research interests. And then a lot of people are like, but Julia, like you're looking at bladder cancer now and acute kidney injury. And the reason that I joined this program wasn't just because of the research that they did, it was because of the clinical and translational aspect of it. So the nice thing about it is the way that it's set up, a lot of the classes that we're taking are the same ones that medical students take. We get the same lectures, except, more is added because we need to have that more depth of information and understanding compared to a lot of medical students, depending on what area they go into. And so we have that basis of knowledge. So that way, when we're at, the lab bench, we know how to connect it and we know how to make these results make sense to physicians and to patients and to make sure that, the care and stuff that they're getting ultimately helps them in a way that, they can be communicating properly about it. They know what's happening, they can keep up with it, but also just the updates of science that are happening and all the different technologies and things that are coming out. It's really impactful. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the program, because if I had this communication and stuff set up a long time ago, back when I was 18, because I'm now about to turn 27 next month, I think it would have made quite a big difference. Like, I might be in a different spot right now than I was before, or, and that's something like my mother, she's actually deaf. And so she has some other, disabilities and things that go along with that. And so with her constantly being in and out of hospitals and doctors' offices and stuff like that, I really had to be an advocate for her because she didn't know what to do or what was going on. And so starting from a young age, like I really had to try to pick up on these things. And I think if we have more professionals in the field, in any field really, who know how to work with different groups of people who are at different levels of understanding, the better. Because not everyone can read at the same level, not everyone can understand, not everyone speaks the same language. Like, we need to be able to analyze these situations. And that's a lot of what I've gotten from my program too. And I think that's very fundamental to what I want to go into.
No, absolutely. And I certainly would stress to most people that that's really what the equity and inclusion side of diversity really highlights. The fact that you're not necessarily creating new avenues or new routes, you're allowing everyone to be able to access those same opportunities. And it's really that fairness, that equality of access rather than necessarily even equality of opportunity, which is another catch-all jargonistic term that tends to be thrown in there. But the other thing, you spoke a lot about the motivational side. Have you got anyone who particularly inspired you to be who you are today? So you've spoke about your more motivational side, but what about the inspiration?
Yeah, I have honestly a lot of people who have inspired me. Because again, mentioning my dad just to begin with my motivation, but also when I wanted to drop out of college, he told me not to. He wanted me to stay, he wanted me to keep going with it. And now, he's at a different point in his disease progression, and he'll actually tell like the nurses and stuff that I'm growing kidneys in the lab because he doesn't quite get it when I'm doing cell culture. But that's still someone who has inspired me because he went through a lot in his life, and it's one of those things where he didn't get to have the opportunities that he wanted to have that now I get to have, so I'm going to take advantage of it. But then also my sister Joyce and my brother Billy, they are much older than me. My sister is about 12 years older than me, and my brother is about 8 years older than me. And they've also had to experience a lot and go through a lot and fight to be where they are today. And they've kind of helped pave the way for me being so young. They taught me so much growing up and just really enforced this like drive in me. And my sister, she works in New York City at this amazing company in HR, and she also has her degree in social work, things like that. And she's amazing. She does so much all the time for helping other people, and I love to be able to see that. And my brother has really been through the ringer. He's done a lot, and it was hard for him with different things going on in his life, but he figured it out. Like, he's on track. He's working a great job that he really enjoys and he loves, and no matter what he went through and what was going on, he was always still there. There would be periods of time where maybe, we wouldn't talk due to stuff going on in his life, but he would always come back. And I always knew that no matter what, he loved us and he just needed time. And I think it taught me a valuable lesson about like patience as well. Because sometimes I'm one of those people where I love instant gratification. Like, I want it now. But with him, I think it was a lesson that I needed to just know when to sit back and like let things happen. And now like we have the best relationship, and so they're very instrumental in all the things that I do. And then with my mom, like my family has been very, very like core in everything that I do. And it's funny because like we all live all across the country, so we don't get to see each other every day, not even every month. It's maybe once a year if anything, but they're still there. And then on top of that, also one of my biggest role models right now is one of the forensic pathologists that I worked with, Dr. Huddle. I adore her. And then her husband, Dr. Whaley, too. They really, really showed me like what the job was like and showed me how to get there. Even all the struggles that come with it. They're pretty big, playing a role in my life. And that was something that I think as a child, it was hard to find good role models, I guess, especially within science for women. And that was really, really hard. I wanted to be a scientist since I was probably in first grade. Like, I knew that right off the bat. But talking to other people, I was told that I couldn't do that and I couldn't do this because I'm a girl and that's not a job for girls, stuff like that. And, when you're a kid and you hear that, you're like, oh, okay, I guess I can't do that. Like, you listen to adults about that stuff. And growing up, when I would start to see more people be involved and like seeing my sister do so many good things, that's when I was like, you know what? I don't care what these other people say. It's like the people that are in my life are the ones that are the most important, and seeing them succeed and do these things makes me so happy. And then that's when I started getting more into social media too, and just seeing all these other women around the world, even who are established in their careers in medicine and all that stuff. And that further drives me. So honestly, I look up to so many different people. They probably don't even know it or understand why. But I think it's instrumental to be able to have people who not only look like you, but are in the same field and have maybe a similar background to you, to be able to see that, if they did it, then so can I. And so that's kind of what I also want to show other people as well.
As someone who's done a lot of research in more of the area of representation and the importance of role modeling, I definitely, every time I hear guests come on and talk about the importance of whether that be individuals who've promoted that behavioral value in their own family or whether it's individuals that have inspired them, it's really interesting to see that this is happening. And what people need to recognize is I would say, the non-transactional nature of the academic journey, that it's not just about gaining skills, qualifications, it's about the stories, the individuals, the more personability of it. And that's really what makes the experience worthwhile for the individuals, and that we need to have more of it. And yeah, I think the content education side is a fantastic resource for many people, especially if it's done in a way that is really accessible to that broad audience. So absolutely, 100%. But in terms of, you've already spoken about the end goal in terms of your core motivation, but if you were hoping to have that overarching impact, what would it be, and what does that look like in terms of measuring the achievement in any way?
Yeah, so I've worked a lot with high school students over the summer and stuff, and it's one of my favorite things. And something that I always tell them too is like, remember that success is different for every single person. It's not linear. Like you don't just do good on something once and then you're forever set. Like things happen. And so I think for me personally, measuring success is a little more difficult because I think it's hard to also recognize where you're at in life and be like, yeah, I've done so much. Like it's easy to, be sitting on the couch and be like, oh, I'm so lazy. Like I didn't get enough done. But then when you look back, like you have this whole list of things that you've been working on. So I think ultimately, at the end of my time, when I am old and it's my time to go, I want to be able to look back on my life and saw that I stepped up and that I did something and that I used my voice to help others in any way, honestly. And more related to my field, I know how much of an impact forensic pathology has, and that without forensic pathologists, it can get dangerous. And there's a lot that can get missed and glossed over. And ultimately, who that's going to end up hurting the most are going to be different minorities. And we don't want that to happen. And I know it's always one of those things where it's like you don't want to hear a white woman talk about the importance of minorities, because I typically like to, hand the microphone over to someone from that community to let them talk. I like to use my space to amplify their voices. But in situations like this, I think it's also important to use your voice and say, hey, like, this is what we need to do, or hey, this isn't right, we shouldn't do this, things like that. And so, in terms of measuring my success, I want to know that I've encouraged other people to pursue the field, especially more diverse people. We need different ideas to help us progress within the field and also understand different things that are happening. Like right now, where I work, we're surrounded by a lot of reservations with Indigenous communities. And so I think it's important to have Indigenous people as forensic pathologists to be able to work with their own communities. Because right now, a lot of them, they don't really trust us for good reason, really, because who really wants to trust the government at the end of the day, especially when you've been screwed over so many times. And so having someone who understands you and where you came from is the most important thing. And so a lot of my high school students that I worked with, a lot of them were Indigenous. And so I would always tell them, like, Your voice is important. You deserve to be heard. You need to be heard. So you can do whatever you want, like no matter what someone else tells you, career wise and goals and aspirations, like those are important for them to hear and to know that they're supported. And so I think it's not an easy thing to be like, checking off a list of things that I've done that I'm like, yeah, okay, now I'm successful. But yeah, at the end of my time when I'm done, I want to be able to look back and be like, okay, I did something and I made an impact with people, regardless of what it was.
I think, like you're saying, I think equally that outlook of not having that list, I think, is really important because most people who look back and think, "Oh yeah, that was I did a lot." It's generally after not having intended to have that massive list. It's more people have highlighted, "Oh yeah, but you've done this." That's possibly the better way of being told, "Yeah, you did have a real impact." I know that's what a lot of teachers get out of different experiences when they've been told, "Oh yeah, you really had an impact," rather than it's not the certificate that you get for greatest contribution. It's the little things that tend to be that thing that gives you that gratification.
Yeah, exactly. I think I used to have a list of some sort where I was like, I want to be married by the time I'm like 30, or like I want to have graduated college at this age and then started my career at this age. And then when I didn't do those things, like obviously it's heartbreaking because you're like, well, now I'm behind and I'm failing compared to the other people in my life, when that's not how that works. It's your life. You have hopefully so much time that's there. And so putting things in a list and just checking them off, I think at the end of the day, doesn't really help people, because then, like you said, it's frustrating when you're focusing on one thing, you forget about all the other stuff. So
Yeah, I think I can remember someone saying to me, it's not about the what you achieve, it's the why you've achieved it that is a better outlook to have in life. So rather than, like you say, those lists which are more goals for what you've done, it's more why did you do it in the first place and what was that overarching motivation to pursue it. But if keeping on the topic a bit more around more of that goal, what is it that excites you about what you do?
yeah, so within forensic pathology, at least, what makes me really excited is the fact that I get to be a voice for the voiceless, right? I get to help and hopefully ensure that there is justice that is being done. I get to do right by a decedent because I think death is a very taboo subject for a lot of people. Obviously, it's not fun, nobody likes it. It's the worst day of everyone's life. And oftentimes, because it's so taboo, people don't want to talk about it. And it gets shut out, they get forgotten, things like that. And decedents don't really get the respect that they would deserve in those scenarios, right? And so I think it's important to educate and talk about it and bring awareness to this to help them. And so that's what really excites me, is being able to share this information that I'm learning, especially now in the age of social media. True crime is a really, really big thing. And a lot of people watch it and they don't understand what's happening or like why we make the decisions that we do. And sometimes this can scare them. This can make them upset, thinking that we're not doing our jobs right. And, maybe there are some people who don't, as is in every single field. But in general, like being able to teach them about why we collect this kind of evidence and why we don't collect this, or, this is what this means and this is how this pathology works, is really important. So people know how to approach media in different ways. So that way they don't have to be as scared and frustrated as they were before. And I think helping people kind of overcome that idea and understanding this process is what really makes me happy, because, working in this field, I can't bring their loved ones back. I can't take away all their pain and suffering. I can't make their lives the way it was before. But what I can do is give them the truth. And that's what's important. And that was like roughly based off a quote that I actually read in a book about forensic anthropology. And he had stated that he's like, I can give them the truth. And that is the best thing that we can do in this scenario. And that's what they deserve. Because then from then on, they can start to grieve, they can process things, and they can then return back to their life. And that's a great thing to be able to give, especially as a scientist.
So, what did you want to be when you grew up, Julia?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist, actually.
And to follow up then, how do you want to be seen by other people?
So I want to be seen as an advocate and a fighter, essentially, that I take care of people.
And how would you summarize your field in 10 words or less?
Yeah. So, for forensic pathology, we use the body as a tool, as the scene, the crime scene, to help investigate and bring peace to families.
So, on the flip of that, what's the biggest challenge facing your field then?
The biggest challenge is understaffing and a lack of pathologists that are there.
So, what's a weird fact or something that other people wouldn't otherwise know about you that you want to share?
I have a weird fact. You can tell me if this is an acceptable one. I've actually had organophosphate poisoning from work. It's an innocent, interesting story. It relates to my job and, the hazards that we see. So,
Well, thank you, Julie. And just as a bit of a disclaimer, this is where my audio and video basically froze at this point. So some of these points are reclarified questions that I've asked Julia previously, and with a bit of editing to add these back into the narrative. So, Julia, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want it to be perceived by other people, professionally or academically?
yeah. I think too, for going into kind of specifics about this with my legacy, I also, when I become a physician and I work in forensic pathology and neuropathology, I also want to be heavily involved in public health. So my dream one day would be to start some kind of initiative, to bring education to communities that don't really have a great access to it, especially when it comes to health. Because a lot of what we do, we tend to be one of the frontline people in public health. We see a lot of things starting off like different illnesses that start, like with COVID. We were some of the first people to see that because no one knew what was going on, so pathologists were the ones behind the scenes looking into it. We noticed trends in death rates and things like that, so we know how to aliquot money to help aliquot money to different causes for research and things like that, because death certificates are one of the biggest things for funding, based on the rates and how many people are dying from whatever it may be. But I really want to start an initiative to help people with these things, because a lot of the times these different communities are impacted differently due to like a lack of resources, a lack of education in general. Maybe they just don't have the funding for it, whatever it may be, but also maybe their understanding of what's going on. And so I think sometimes being able to have someone who can go out there and work directly with these communities would be a really good idea. And so my dream would be to start some kind of community or group where we have physicians who can go out there and do these things. And, a physician's schedule is very busy, but, if we make just a little bit of time, it may help massively in preventative measures, which would be really great. And going out to be face to face with these community members, maybe have them, whoever wants to come, gather in a room. We can teach a class, we can make videos, or we can hand out pamphlets, whatever it may be, but something like that. And I think that is something, hopefully, if I were to be able to start that, it was something I can continue and that other people would want to continue and pass on, even when I'm not here anymore.
But part of this is really down to the fact that we have a really poor job of science communication and passing that information on to the general public. And I know you have some very strong thoughts on this area, and I'd love to hear a bit more about it.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot to manage. And like one of the things that I can think of right off the top of my head too is a lot of minorities are scared of organ donation. Because, back in a while ago, although not too long ago, I think it only stopped in maybe the 90s, there would be people who were taken off the streets, typically minorities, and they would have their organs harvested. And so now, while we have a more like foundational way of approaching these things, they're still scared. Like there's this common myth that, people, if they find out you're an organ donor and you're being rushed to the emergency room, they're not going to try as hard to save you because they want to take your organs, things like that. And I think that's something that really hits home with a lot of minority communities, because that was something that happened pretty much not really all that time ago or long ago. And I think there's a lot, instead of, you can tell them over and over again that this doesn't happen, but just saying it is different from being able to prove it and show them. And you have to be able to approach them in a different way than just, oh, well, you're wrong. Like, you're so stupid for believing in this or whatever. And so we have to really change that mindset because even I personally am not perfect about this, especially on social media. When someone says something that's incorrect or they're like fully into conspiracy theories, sometimes, you get into these arguments, but at the end of the day, like, you have to understand where they're coming from too, if your goal is also going to be to change their mind. And some people don't want to change their minds. And so, if you can't do that, maybe you just have to drop the conversation, do what you can. Maybe plant little seeds here and there so they start thinking about it more as well. And maybe eventually one day they'll come around and figure it out. But also, if they don't want to, they don't want to, and that's their thing. Or, you can also ask them, like, what kinds of stuff do you want to see from us at the end of the day that will help you change your mind or that would make you change your mind? And then if they can give you a list of like, oh, I just want to see research that says X, Y, and Z, or I want to see a physician who does this, or, understand more or like see how this mechanism works behind this treatment, whatever it may be, then we know where to start and where we can go with it and how to help them get there.
Now, I know I've seen from your content before that when you're trying to convey and explain a video and you're trying to communicate a particular powerful message with people, that, as I've experienced myself, when you're trying to have that discussion and encourage people to engage with the research, engage with that material, but it can be incredibly difficult and challenging when you have some individuals who simply have already made that really set view that they are never going to change, and therefore are not necessarily debating, but they are particularly just trying to have a shouting match with you. And how we manage the comment section, how we engage with both the positive, negative, and the neutral actors is incredibly challenging as content educators.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I just love having debates in general and discussions about things. So sometimes I don't really know the difference between when someone's genuinely asking and when someone's trying to just, be like a troll or something like that in the comments. And so I might like get wrapped up in something that maybe I don't want to be in, but then I always remind myself, like, yeah, maybe someone else is reading this later and they get to learn something from it. And making that impact, even if it's one person, still is a difference and it means something.
So, how would you say you've been shaped by your academic heritage? So, whether that be supervisors, advisors, or family members, what does that look like to you as your academic journeys unfolded?
Right. Yeah. That's a good point to bring up. So I am a first generation student, and so my mom, the most she's had is a certificate in architecture. So this was a while ago before they really had formalized classes for it and everything. So she had a little bit of that, but that was really it. She had a very different experience in school because she was deaf. They taught her a lot differently. They didn't teach her sign language. They only taught her how to read lips and like how to speak. And that was about it. And so she's been really behind for a lot of her life. And then with my dad, he actually wanted to be, I think, a computer engineer, like right when computers really started to become a big and important thing. Um, he wanted to do that, but then he ended up having to go to Vietnam because he was in the war. And so I think he served like 2 tours or something like that. But when he came back, he was really destroyed by everything that he had seen and that had been involved in. And so he wasn't able to pursue that kind of education anymore. He ended up becoming a mailman instead and did that for a really long time. But, I've had some family members that have gone to college and a few maybe who have gotten their master's degree, but none who have really gone into science or any who had gone into medicine. And growing up, that was hard too, especially now going through school. It was hard to not have a resource of someone who can be like, this is what you can do and this is what you shouldn't do. Like, if you want to get into med school, you need to do this kind of a thing. Um, so my heritage really, there isn't much in academia, at least on the science side. And so maybe one day I will have started this for someone else and more people in my family, stuff like that. But it's interesting being first generation, and hopefully I can inspire more people to forge their own path.
So, off the back of that, what advice would you give for the next generation who are coming through, to those undergraduate students who are getting that first experience or deciding on what pathway they're going to pursue?
Yeah, so I always tell people when they're in undergrad, if they think they like something and you have the ability to, it's hard with money and whatnot, check out a class. see if you can take one class in that area. If you really like it, then you can stick with it, change your major, stuff like that. And otherwise, you kind of know because now you've tried it a little bit and can go from there. Or you can always, if you can't take a class, you can try to join a club and then maybe you can learn more that way to see if that is really what you want to do if you don't have any other experience from it. And then a lot of it too, I've learned going into more specifically my area, there's a lot of networking that's involved. So you have to be able to meet a lot of people who are in forensic science and forensic pathology to be able to understand more about what's going on, to try to get more shadowing opportunities. Because a lot of these, because they are medical procedures with autopsies, it's hard to get in. You know, they don't want to bring just a random person in to see something that's so sensitive. And so being able to network and build that rapport with someone so they trust you, that can also make a difference. I would say if someone wants to aim to go to medical school, there's a lot that goes into it. So I always tell people start early because that's what I did not do because I didn't know for a really long time. And so, you know, you have to have good grades and you have to take an exam that's an entrance exam and whatnot. So obviously you want to do well in those, but also you need like clinical experience working with patients. Try to do that early. Find something that you actually enjoy because if you're just checking off boxes on a list, you know, people can tell. Getting involved in research is a really good other option too. They want to see that. They also want to see volunteering. So the earlier you start exploring these things, the better, because then you get to really see where your interest lies. And then you make those connections along the way. Something that I always recommend to people too is if they are also first generation, especially if they're low income, they need to look into something called TRIO programs in the United States. I'm not sure how far they expand, but it's made up of, I think, 5 or 6 different programs here at my university that I'm at. There's the McNair Scholars Program, there's Student Support Services. We also have Upward Bound. I think there's Talent Search, and then Equal Opportunity Credit, I believe is what it's called. But these all have different aims. So I was a McNair Scholar, and so what that is, it's for first generation students who are low income who want to pursue higher education, whether that be your master's or your PhD. Their end goal is that they would like you to pursue a PhD. So when you get that, they help out in so many different ways. So they completely waived my tuition. I didn't have to pay tuition in undergrad. They helped me get involved in research and helped me build connections that I wouldn't have known of otherwise. And then I got paid to do research, right? And I also got fee waivers for different exams that I needed to take or like study materials. They also offered tutoring that I didn't have to pay for. Like there were a lot of things. I also was able to go to conferences for free. They would pay for my flight, my hotel, food, all that stuff to send me out to a conference. And if you want to present, they help you with that and getting that set up so you can do your research there. All these different things. And then there's also like student support services, just very basic, like if you need tutoring or extra advice, and if your advisor really isn't working well with you, the one that you were assigned through the school, you get one through them that helps you pick out classes. Upward Bound is actually for high school students. And so you can sign up for this. Same kind of gist if you're low income, first generation. That's kind of the whole thing about this program. You can sign up for it. And it's to help show students who may not know what college looks like what it is. And so they'll come out over the summer for 6 weeks. They stay in the dorms. They take little classes on campus, and usually it correlates to what they're learning in high school. They can earn college credits that way, or not college credits, but high school credits that way. And then when they're a senior and they graduate, they can actually earn some college credits. So it'll help like set them off on the right path for their GPA, stuff like that. They learn a lot that way to give them those experiences beforehand. And I haven't worked with the other areas so much, so I can't really say too much about them, but it really helps to have these people there who are there to guide you when you have no idea what's happening. But also, don't be afraid to just say that you don't like something. I think I changed my major 3 or 4 different times when I was an undergrad and like reorganized things and decided I didn't like certain things. And, you know, it's a lot to figure out. And so having people there to help you through the university can also be really helpful. So always look for resources that your school provides.
As one of the features of sitting down with scholars, and Julia, I'd like to ask you, what would be that question that you would ask to my next guest, whether they're a researcher or a content educator, about what you'd want to know about their experience?
Right. Something that I like to ask a lot of people especially right now with how big imposter syndrome is, especially for people like us who may be in school, or even, people who are established. They sometimes feel like they don't belong. And so I would like them to share a moment where they were in their field and they just Right. Something that I like to ask a lot of people, especially right now with how big imposter syndrome is, especially for people like us who may be in school, or even, people who are established. They sometimes feel like they don't belong. And so I would like them to share a moment where they were in their field and they discovered that, this is how I know what I want to do. Like, I feel comfortable here. I feel confident. Like, this is what I like. And then also, explain how they manage imposter syndrome too, even when sometimes you feel confident, but maybe sometimes you don't.
So the question from my previous guest was from Anna, and she wanted to know, how do you treat your online presence? Did you have a particular purpose in mind when you designed it, or was it just something that was an experiment for you? And how has that evolved and shaped over time?
When I first started, I think it was more of an experiment because I started my Instagram account, I think right when the COVID pandemic started. I was seeing all these other accounts, and, I kind of just liked the idea of it. And I was having a hard time staying focused with schoolwork. Doing everything from home was hard. I was like, oh, my bed's right there. I could just take a nap, or, oh, I could just watch TV instead. And so I made this account to kind of help hold myself accountable for what I was doing. So every day I would post a to-do list and be like, I have to get this assignment done, this reading, and this. And so then at the end of the day, I knew that people were looking at it. And so then I could update them because I knew other people would be kind of holding me accountable. Essentially, it's kind of like a buddy system. And the more I did that, I started just making general posts about like my undergrad education, what I was doing. But then I also saw a lot of people who were in forensics that way, or online. And so I was like, oh, well, I could maybe start talking about what I'm learning in forensic pathology and like see if people like that. And people did. And so I was talking about what it was like to be an autopsy technician, the things that we do and how we assist. And as I was learning, I also tried to encourage discussion like in my comments as well, especially when I moved over to TikTok. So I'd always be like, other forensic professionals, or like death investigators, or other forensic pathologists who are here. If you want to add to this, or add a point, or bring something up, maybe something I missed, or, if you do something differently, I think it's really great to have that discussion to understand how things work everywhere. But also for people who may be thinking about joining the field, then they can read through these discussions and see it. And I think that was always really great. And I had such a fun time being able to do that and help kind of boost that. And I think I got a lot out of social media that I didn't think I was going to get. I've made so many new friends and met so many different people in different fields that, I never really would have thought about before. Like, I talk to people who are in chemical engineering, and I have no interest in engineering. That's not the field for me, but it's still cool to see what they're doing and what they're talking about. And, it's good to have those connections because you never know when you're going to need it. And I think social media helped me in a lot of ways. And now I get to hopefully help other people.
Well, thank you very much, Julia, for sharing your academic journey with myself and to my listeners so they can find out a bit more about what you do and what you're hoping to do in your field. And equally, for anyone who wants to find out more from Julia and listen to more of her academic stories and just find out what she's up to, I'll attach various different social media profiles which Julia has kindly shared into the comments so that you can find out more about her academic experience and that you can follow along for the journey. And please join me next time on another episode of Sitting Down with Scholars, where I'll be joined by another scholar and they'll talk about their academic journey with you.